Life in the suburbs had always seemed pretty predictable. Mow the lawn on Saturdays, cheer for the local high school football team on Fridays, and take the child to training every other day. My wife, Lindsay, and I had been married for 11 years, and while I wouldn't say every moment was bliss, I thought we were solid. We had a rhythm, you know? Our daughter, Emma, was 9 and all freckles and energy. She kept us busy, and life felt like one long checklist. Groceries, bills, parent-teacher conferences. It was exhausting but manageable. Lindsay worked as an event planner, which meant she was always juggling schedules and fielding late-night calls from stressed-out brides or panicky corporate bigwigs. It kept her on her toes, and honestly, I thought it was kind of impressive how she handled it all. Things started unraveling on a random Tuesday, which, looking back, is fitting. Tuesdays are forgettable. They sneak by with none of the dread of Monday or the anticipation of Friday. That particular Tuesday, I had taken Emma to her piano lesson while Lindsay said she needed to swing by the mall for a last-minute client gift. Nothing unusual. She was always the thoughtful one, never showing up empty-handed. Emma and I got home before her, and as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. Lindsay's phone was sitting on the passenger seat of my car. She must have dropped it in there when she grabbed Emma's piano bag earlier. I picked it up, figuring she'd be freaking out without it. Lindsay was glued to that thing, her lifeline to the chaos of her work world. I almost called her from my phone to let her know, but then I remembered she had that Find My Phone app. I opened her phone to trigger the alert, and that's when I saw the message. It wasn't just any message. It was a photo, blurry, but unmistakable. A guy's arm, tan and muscular, with a tattoo snaking up his bicep, resting on what I realized was Lindsay's shoulder. Her face was just out of frame, but her necklace, the one I gave her for our 10th anniversary, glinted unmistakably in the corner of the shot. I blinked, trying to process it. Was it some kind of joke? A co-worker messing around? The text below the photo read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." The ground didn't exactly fall away from beneath me, but something inside felt like it broke a little. I stared at the phone, my mind racing to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. Emma came bounding out of the car, and I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get inside," I said, forcing a smile. Inside, Emma plopped down in front of the TV, and I sat at the kitchen table, Lindsay's phone like a grenade in my hand. I scrolled further. Messages, photos, calls logged at odd hours. None of it was blatant, but all of it added up to something that didn't sit right. When Lindsay walked through the door an hour later, clutching a bag from Macy's and smiling like any other day, I couldn't bring myself to ask. Instead, I just handed her the phone. "You left this in the car," I said, keeping my tone even. Her face didn't change. She took the phone, glanced at it, and tossed it on the counter. "Thanks," she said, breezing past me like nothing was wrong. And maybe nothing was wrong. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But as I watched her go upstairs, my gut told me otherwise. The days that followed weren't easy. There was this weight in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't reach, but I kept telling myself not to be that guy. The one who sees ghosts where there are none. I mean, Lindsay and I weren't perfect, but who is? Relationships go through phases. People get busy. It's normal. That's what I told myself, anyway. Still, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Maybe they'd always been there, and I was just looking harder now. Like how she'd laugh a little too easily at her texts, her face glowing in the light of her phone while she sat on the couch. Or how she seemed to put a bit more effort into her appearance on random weekdays, leaving the house in outfits that felt more suited for a night out than a client meeting. But I didn't say anything. What was I going to say? "Hey, why are you wearing eyeliner on a Wednesday?" It felt ridiculous, and honestly, I didn't want to be wrong. If I was wrong, then I was just paranoid. If I was right, well, I wasn't ready to go there yet. One evening, about a week after the photo incident, we were having dinner. It was one of those rushed meals, thrown together between Emma's homework and Lindsay's calls. Spaghetti and Jarrett sauce. Not exactly fine dining, but it got the job done. Lindsay was halfway through her plate when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and just for a second, I caught a flicker of something in her expression. something quick and fleeting, like the look you get when you realize you've been caught doing something you shouldn't. She picked up the phone, turned her chair slightly, and started typing. Fast. Too fast. Emma, oblivious as ever, was chattering about a project at school. I nodded along, but my attention was on Lindsay. She wasn't laughing this time. Whatever was on her screen had her full focus, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could. She glanced up, her expression perfectly composed now. Yeah, just a work thing. Clients freaking out over a venue change, she said, setting the phone face down on the table. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something about the way she avoided my eyes that didn't sit right. Later that night, after Emma was in bed and the house had settled into its usual quiet, I found myself in the kitchen, rinsing off the last of the dishes. The sound of the shower upstairs echoed faintly through the house, the steady rhythm of water masking the silence around me. Lindsay had gone upstairs a while ago, claiming exhaustion after another long day. As I wiped my hands on a dish towel, her phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating sharply against the granite. I glanced at it instinctively, not thinking much of it. But when I saw the screen light up, the name displayed made my stomach tighten. It said, Michael. For a split second, I thought maybe it was a work thing. She had mentioned a colleague by that name before, hadn't she? But before I could push the thought aside, the phone buzzed again. A call this time. The name Michael filled the screen, bold and glaring. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. She was still in the shower. The phone buzzed insistently in my hand. Against every instinct screaming at me to put it down, I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say a word. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a voice that sent a cold rush through me. Hello, darling, the man said smoothly. Let's meet tonight. Same place. I froze. My grip tightened on the phone, but no sound escaped me. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Before he could say anything else, I ended the call, my thumb shaking as it hit the red button. I placed the phone back on the counter exactly where I'd found it, as if touching it any longer might burn me. My mind raced, my thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and confusion. Darling? Same place? What the hell was going on? The shower stopped upstairs. I heard the faint shuffle of Lindsay moving around, the creak of the bathroom door. I had just enough time to compose myself, turning my attention back to the sink as though nothing had happened. A few minutes later, she walked into the kitchen, her damp hair pulled back and her robe tied neatly at the waist. She smiled at me, the kind of smile you'd give someone you'd known forever, comfortable, unassuming. Hey, she said, opening the fridge and pulling out a bottle of water. I turned to her, trying to keep my voice steady. Your phone rang while you were in the shower. Her hand froze on the bottle cap for just a fraction of a second before she twisted it open. Oh? Who was it? I studied her face carefully, searching for something, anything, that might betray her. Some guy named Michael, I said, the name feeling foreign and bitter on my tongue. He didn't leave a message or anything. She didn't miss a beat, shrugging casually as she took a sip. Michael? Oh, he's just someone from work. Probably about that venue issue I mentioned earlier. Her answer came so quickly, so effortlessly, that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. But there was a flicker in her eyes, something she couldn't quite hide. I nodded, not pressing further. Makes sense, I said, forcing a neutral tone. She smiled again, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and headed upstairs to bed, leaving me alone in the kitchen once more. But this time, I wasn't standing there in confusion. No, this time, I knew something wasn't right. My gut churned with a mixture of doubt and determination. If her explanation was so innocent, why did it feel like a lie? I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to let it go. Not yet. If she thought she could hide something, I needed to know what it was. So, quietly, carefully, I made up my mind to start paying closer attention. I wasn't about to confront her, not until I had more than just words to go on. Something was happening, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. The days that followed were some of the strangest I'd ever lived through. Nothing was outwardly different. Not in the way Lindsay spoke to me or how we carried on with our usual routines. We still ate dinner as a family, still exchanged goodnight kisses before bed. On the surface, life moved on like normal. But under that thin layer of normalcy, my mind was churning non-stop. The name Michael echoed in my head at the most random times, during my commute, while brushing my teeth, even when I was sitting with Emma as she explained her latest school project. It wasn't just the name, though. It was the way he'd spoken. Casual, confident in a way that made my skin crawl. I started watching Lindsay more closely, picking up on the little things I'd overlooked before. I told myself I wasn't being paranoid, just observant. She was still coming home at her usual time, still spending evenings with us. But once or twice, I caught her staring at her phone longer than necessary, her thumb hovering over the screen before tucking it away as if nothing had happened. It was on a Tuesday that I decided I couldn't sit idly by anymore. Lindsay had mentioned she had a team meeting after work and wouldn't be home until late. It wasn't the first time she'd had evening obligations, but now, with Michael in the picture, I wasn't so sure it was a team meeting she was going to. That evening, after she kissed Emma goodbye and left the house, I waited for a solid 10 minutes before grabbing my coat. I told Emma I'd be back soon, just running an errand, and then slipped out the door. I didn't have a plan, not really. I knew where she worked, of course, but I didn't know where this so-called meeting was supposed to take place. So, I parked my car in the lot across the street from her office building and waited. It was a little over an hour before I saw her. She wasn't alone. She came out of the building with a man who was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a way that said he didn't spend much time behind a desk. He had dark hair and a swagger about him that set my teeth on edge. Lindsay walked beside him, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a way that felt far too familiar. I felt a cold wave of something, anger, disbelief, maybe both, wash over me as I watched them. They got into his car, and before I could think too much about what I was doing, I started my engine and followed. The drive wasn't long, just a few miles out of the downtown area, to a dimly lit parking lot behind a bar I didn't recognize. I parked a safe distance away and watched as they got out of the car. Lindsay was smiling, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The man leaned close, saying something that made her laugh again, and then they walked inside together. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with every possible explanation, some innocent, others far less so, but none of them made sense. Eventually, I drove home, not trusting myself to do anything rash. I needed more than just what I'd seen tonight. I needed proof. The next morning, I was quiet at breakfast, letting Lindsay fill the space with her usual chatter about work and how she was going to be swamped with deadlines. I nodded along, feigning interest, while inside, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had all the pieces. So, I started paying closer attention to her schedule, to the gaps in her day that didn't quite add up. I checked her social media accounts, not that she posted much, and casually asked about her coworkers to see if she'd mentioned Michael. She didn't. The following week, she had another work dinner. This time, I didn't just follow her. I parked outside the restaurant and went in, sitting at the bar where I could see but not be seen. Sure enough, there she was, tucked into a booth with the same man, their heads close together as they talked. I ordered a drink I didn't touch, watching as she leaned across the table, her hand brushing his. Every move she made felt like a punch to the gut. When they left, I stayed put, trying to make sense of the mess unraveling before me. I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just suspicion. It was real. That night, as she climbed into bed beside me, her hair smelling faintly of wine and whatever perfume she always wore, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The woman beside me wasn't the same person I'd married, or at least, she didn't feel like it. The worst part was that I didn't know who she was anymore, or if I ever truly had. The more I observed, the more the truth became impossible to deny. Lindsay's excuses had grown thinner, her lies more rehearsed. But I still clung to the hope that I might be wrong, that maybe, somehow, I had misunderstood everything. That hope kept me quiet, even as my chest ached with every unanswered question. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening, a day that had started just like any other. Lindsay had been unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming to herself as she packed Emma's lunch. She kissed both of us on the cheek before heading out the door, her scent lingering in the air like a ghost. "I've got a client dinner tonight," she'd said casually. "Don't wait up for me. It might go late." The words set me on edge, but I kept my face neutral, nodding as if I believed her. As soon as she left, I began planning. That evening, after Emma was settled in bed, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I didn't know where this client dinner was supposed to be, but I had a pretty good idea where she'd actually be. I drove straight to the bar where I'd seen her with Michael the week before, parking across the street in a spot that gave me a clear view of the entrance. My heart pounded as I waited, every passing minute stretching into eternity. It wasn't long before her car pulled into the lot. She wasn't alone. Michael was in the passenger seat, his arm resting casually on the console between them. They were talking, laughing, completely at ease with each other. I watched as they got out of the car and walked toward the building. At the door, Michael stopped, turning to face her. He said something that made her smile, a real smile, the kind that lit up her entire face. Then, without hesitation, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck or a hesitant gesture. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the car, leaving me gasping for breath. They disappeared inside, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd seen everything. I sat there for what felt like hours, the image of their kiss replaying in my mind like a cruel loop. Every detail was burned into my memory. The way her fingers had curled into his jacket, the tilt of her head, the look in her eyes. Eventually, I forced myself to move, stepping out of the car and walking across the street. I didn't have a plan, just a simmering anger that bubbled up with every step. The bar was dimly lit and crowded, the hum of conversation blending with the clink of glasses and the low thrum of music. I scanned the room, my eyes narrowing as I spotted them in a booth near the back. They were leaning close, heads tilted toward each other, completely absorbed in their little bubble. Lindsay was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I stood there, frozen, torn between the urge to confront them and to retreat. A part of me wanted to march over, to demand answers, to shatter whatever fantasy they'd built for themselves. But another part of me, the quieter, more calculating part, knew that I needed to play this smart. I turned and walked out, my chest heaving as I gulped in the cool night air. My head was spinning, my thoughts a chaotic mess of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. When I got home, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at nothing. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator. This was it. There was no denying it anymore. I had seen it with my own eyes. Later that night, Lindsay came home. I could feel the weight of the silence in the room. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I had been pacing back and forth, trying to keep my mind busy, but nothing could distract me from the nagging feeling growing inside me. The second she stepped in, I barely recognized her. She looked different, flustered, distant, like she was hiding something. I had to know, had to hear it from her, no matter how much it hurt. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but even I could hear the tension in it. She froze for a moment, and I saw her eyes dart around the room, like she was looking for something to hold on to. Then, almost too quickly, she spoke, "I was just with a friend." I stared at her, my heart pounding. A friend? It didn't add up. The lies, the excuses, they were piling up, and I could feel it all crashing down on me. "With a friend?" I repeated, my voice a little louder now, edged with disbelief. "You told me you had a meeting. A work meeting. That's what you said, remember?" She shifted uncomfortably, her hands nervously fidgeting with her purse strap. She stopped herself. "It was just a quick thing, nothing to worry about." But I wasn't buying it anymore. The pieces weren't fitting together, and something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. "You lied to me, Emma," I said, the words coming out in a low, angry rush. "You lied about where you were. And I don't know who you think you're fooling, but it sure as hell isn't me. Her face went pale, her lips trembling as if she was about to say something, but no words came. And that silence, it was deafening. It was like every second that passed was another layer of the truth I didn't want to hear, but somehow, I knew it was all there. Who is he? I choked out, the question cutting through the air like a blade. She recoiled, like my words had physically hit her. Her eyes widened, and in that instant, I could see the panic, guilt, flood her face. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. It felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. My chest tightened, a sharp ache spreading through my body. No, no, no. Not her. Not Emma. But the evidence was all around me. She couldn't hide it anymore. Don't, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please, don't. You don't understand. Understand? I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow, full of pain. What is there to understand, Emma? That you've been lying to me for God knows how long? That this thing you've been hiding is real? She looked at me like I wasn't the man she had married, like she couldn't recognize the anger in my eyes. But I couldn't stop myself. The rage was burning, filling up all the empty spaces inside me. How could you? I shouted, my voice cracking. How could you do this to us, to me? Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw her on the edge of breaking. She reached out as if to say something, but her words faltered. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. But the words didn't feel real. It was too little, too late. I couldn't believe her anymore. The betrayal was so deep, so raw. I felt like I was suffocating. You never meant to hurt me? I repeated, barely recognizing the anger in my own voice. Well, you did. You did. She looked away, and in that moment, I knew we were done. Everything we'd built, the years, the memories, it was all slipping away. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to hold on. There we stood, both of us, facing the truth in silence. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. No matter how much I tried, all I could see was the lie, the betrayal. It was all too clear now. The things I had been trying to ignore, the little signs that never quite added up, they were all there, screaming at me. I wasn't sure what had hurt more, the fact that I had been deceived for so long, or the realization that she had been living this double life, all while I had been standing there, believing in her. I could feel the rage rising inside me, but it wasn't the rage that scared me. It was the way it twisted into something else, something colder, something final. The truth hit me like a wave, drowning any shred of hope that had been left. I had tried so hard to hold it together, to convince myself that we could fix things, that maybe it was just a mistake, that maybe I was overreacting. But now I saw it for what it really was. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And she had chosen him. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't stay in a marriage that was built on lies and deceit. The anger bubbled up again, sharper this time. It wasn't even about the affair anymore. It was about the years I had wasted, the trust that had been shattered, and the cold realization that I had given her everything, only to be left with nothing. I wanted to yell, to scream, to ask why, but the question had no answer. It didn't matter anymore. It wasn't going to change anything. I was done. I had made my decision. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep living like this. Every moment had been a lie. Every word she'd said felt hollow now. I didn't recognize her. I didn't recognize myself anymore, either. I thought back to all the times I had looked at her, tried to see the woman I had fallen in love with, but now I knew I was just seeing a stranger. I had given her every part of me, trusted her with everything, and she had destroyed it. In the blink of an eye, everything we had built was gone. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back. I could feel the finality of it all in my chest. The sharp edge of the decision was like a knife, cutting away any doubt I had left. I didn't need to say the words out loud. I knew what had to happen. The marriage was over. I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't. I wouldn't. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. And I wasn't the man I used to be. I felt it then, the weight of it all crashing down. I had no more patience for this, No more energy to fight for something that wasn't even there. I walked away from her, each step heavy with the burden of my decision. My heart was breaking, but it was no longer because of the love I had for her. It was because I had to leave her behind, and everything we once had was now just a painful memory. I knew there was no turning back. There was nothing left to save. And as I walked away, I realized just how final this all was. The door we had walked through together had closed long ago, and now there was no way to reopen it. The silence between us was deafening, and as I left, I knew it was over. For good.